For a little while, there was peace. 1400 years of rebuilding, expansion, and investment as the baronies worked to modernize their federal monarchy, integrating NHPs, blink travel, and paracausal advances into their own infrastructure. Alongside the Second Committee, the baronies expanded into the Don Line shore, now called the Interest, landing its first colonial missions there in 3845 U and securing these holdings by 4000 U. The dynasties of the major houses climbed and fell in popularity and wealth, though never faded. Over time, under this arrangement, the federal Car-Acan monarchy became known, if not formally, as the Car-Acan Trade Baronies, a moniker first appended to it by the freighter captains and harbor masters that administered the NPA, then later picked up as common parlance. The term baron, already in use as formal title in the Car-Acan hierarchy, became more common as linguistic drift worked its way across the empire. In the 4600s U, as revolutionary elements in Cradle and across Union's capital worlds put an end to the Second Committee, the federal Car-Acan monarchy decided it would make its own play on the galaxy. It would firm its grip on the worlds of the Interest, the Don Line Shore colonial expansion zone, and simultaneously deal a nose-breaking blow to the upstart Harrison Armory. The Armory, a rising power made of breakaway elements from the Second Committee, was young and vulnerable, though possessing of a great deal of military expertise, and had its hand on valuable colonial assets it had portioned aside for itself. The FKM saw a perfect opportunity to test the limits of its arrangement with Union and gain ground at the same time. This campaign would be a limited action despite its scale. On one front, an expeditionary effort into the Armory space to secure Ras Shamra, a former GMS Special Projects world, and on the other, a broad, civilian-led expansion into the Don Line shore to make firm the baronies' legal claims to the worlds there. The Armory had been busy making diplomatic overtures to win favor and, presumably, protectorate agreements. The purpose of this, as Karakis saw it, was to steal a number of the Don Line worlds out from under the baronies. Such maneuvers could not stand. The war that followed this decision pitted the imperial aims of Karakis against those of Ras Shamra, for as the Car-Acans planned their two-front mission, so too did Ras Shamra plan its own effort. Sensing the weakness of the newly minted Third Committee, and bolstered by a steady stream of defectors and Anthrocovenist party members, diasporan worlds, and naval units, Harrison Armory, then under the leadership of its founding Director General, John Creighton Harrison I, organized its own fleet to strike out for Cradle. Baronic intelligence monitoring the situation mistakenly believed this fleet to be a weapon aimed for Karakis, and advocated for an immediate preemptive strike on Ras Shamra. But for this interpretation of the Armory's maneuvers, the Third Committee may not have survived its earliest days. Early combat between the Car-Acan Trade Baronies and Harrison Armory heavily favored the baronies, but over time the Armory's terrestrial superiority and adoption of mechs as a primary fighting force overwhelmed baronic forces and led to a stunning defeat. By 4620 U, a tenuous peace had been brokered, with direct involvement from Union's nascent Third Committee. The outcome was so unexpected by baronic forces that it led to the complete overhaul of combat doctrine and the wholesale adoption of chassis in Car-Acan space, as well as the creation of Baronic Unified Command, the Cavalry College, the Royal Academies, and the House and Free Companies. The relationship between the baronies and Union's Third Committee has grown stronger, as Third has continued to distance itself from the cradle-first Anthrocovenism of the Second Committee. From representation on the Central Committee to cadet exchange programs in the Baronic Royal Academies and healthy ongoing migration and trade between Car-Acan and Union core worlds, the baronies today contains multitudes. It is a vast cosmopolitan polity, a proud and ancient culture, and an ally in Union's interests. However, underlying this relationship is a fundamental tension, a canker knot that continues to sour and threatens to destroy everything. The baronies became a Union member state as a necessary condition of peace in the Second Union Car-Acan War, a compromise settled under the Second Committee with the explicit goal of preventing further mutual destruction. Over time, the new Prosperity Agreement, including the exchange of material wealth between both polities, has been thoroughly integrated into both Baronic and Union politics. The Third Committee relied on the agreement to bolster their strength in the early days following the revolution, even as they understood it as a somewhat odious vehicle of its predecessor. Even to the present day, the baronies' raw expertise in raw material extraction and resource exploitation has been vital in feeding Union's shipyards, printers, and colonial expansion efforts, and in upholding the three pillars in core worlds across the Orion Arm. At the same time, the size and relative political independence of the baronies has allowed its subject states to flout, and at times, directly violate those three pillars with shocking frequency. Abject serfdom, though uncommon in the baronies and officially banned, is still practiced. the most direct example of which was found on Ludra's world prior to the ungrateful rebellion of 4601 U. The very existence of the separation between the noble and ignoble classes, a core part of traditional Baronic culture and enthusiastically upheld by the hardline houses, goes heavily against Union doctrine, despite many such worlds enjoying official core status. In recent years, many conservative Baronic houses have flaunted their violations of core Union ideals with even greater liberty, sensing the unwillingness of the Third Committee to follow the hardline policies of its predecessor. This has created an uncomfortable tension in Third Com. Union relies on the new prosperity agreement to fuel its expansion and material prosperity, and to uphold its principles, yet the baronies refuse to adhere to the central principles and policies of the pillars as soon as they are no longer politically convenient, undermining them with each new transgression. This paradox eats at the heart of Third Com's ideology, that Union does not unite by force, but by consensus and consent. Third Com's ideal form, in practice and in theory, is that of a polity that does not ever rule directly, but relies on its member states to hold themselves accountable, often across unfathomably vast gulfs of distance and time. There are various opinions in Union's inner political circles about the long-term viability of this arrangement, and the very existence of the baronies is always at the center of these arguments. Compounding this issue is the Third Committee's extreme reluctance to take a hard-line stance on the matter, outside of conservative factions in the Central Committee and general public. Direct action and interventionist stances like blockades, extradition, and military action are extremely unpopular in modern Union, and growing increasingly so. Every military operation Third Com undertakes, no matter how small or morally uncomplicated, is seen as an abject failure of its core policies, and usually the endpoint of a long chain of mistakes. Even actions taken by the DOJ/HR, the Department of Justice and Human Rights, against extremist elements like slavers and pirates, as infrequently as they happen, generate decades of paperwork and court proceedings, and require heavy sanction, along with sanitization afterwards. Out of extreme fear that it might repeat the mistake of its predecessor, Third Com generally treats the baronies with the lightest touch possible, sending negotiators, running political and propaganda campaigns, and at worst censuring those individuals and organizations that are the most egregious offenders. This light touch has the twofold effect of neither mollifying more pro-interventionist factions nor satisfying those seeking more peaceful solution. As a consequence, Union's influence over baronic politics is agonizingly limited. For all the downsides, there is some wisdom to this restraint. Political turmoil in the baronies is at an all-time high, and civil war is distant but looming threat on the horizon. There is, perhaps, one faint hope for Third Com, a situation with an uncertain outcome, but that validates its ideals, and that, with patience and restraint, will ultimately create a more lasting solution. The baronies is undergoing major political change due to the embrace of republicanism by more and more houses, the Sanjak Revolution, and the movement away from a politically empowered nobility and towards a more equitable social order by many of its most outspoken citizens. Societal reform is coming to the baronies from a deep and genuine place within, but its pace is slow, and it is hampered by the most hardline factions. Time will tell if any of these movements have lasting effects on old Karakais, or if its ponderous size and the weight of its history will allow entrenched conservatives to drag it back into their envisioned glory days, motivated by the war banner, the lance, and a myopic view of human nature. While it is almost certain that factions internal and external to Union are involved in aiding these progressive movements, they cannot do so openly, and more centrist political factions in Union's core are deeply wary of the crisis that would unfold should any such efforts be brought to light. Common rumors suggest that Union's current policy is to rely on small groups of highly talented operators, who can claim to be acting independently. So, what are you waiting for?